of The Day That Changed Forever, written by Tim Rail and adapted for radio by Jason Campbell. I hope you enjoy this.
The drama that led to the climax of human history unfolded rapidly over the course of one single day. Hanging, suspended between heaven and earth, on a hill called Golgotha, or the Skull, 3 men are writhing on rough, rugged, wooden crosses. Their blood mingled with the splinters against their backs. The middle cross bears the person of Jesus of Nazareth. His death sentence is being carried out, one agonizing breath, one drop of blood at a time. Below the cross is a great crowd of people, some taunting, some crying in heartbreaking sorrow, some staring in mute shock.
The death I am watching is killing me too. When you see the person you love the most in the world being crucified before your very eyes, it's enough to make you feel as though your own heart is nailed to a cross. All the other disciples fled into the darkness after Jesus was arrested last night. They're still hiding in the darkness because they're afraid. My name's John. People call me the disciple who Jesus loved, and that love has drawn me to stand here at the foot of the cross. I'm here because of my love for my Master. I can't be any other place but near him now, but I'm not here alone. I'm not the only one who loves Jesus. I'm not the only one with tears streaming down my face, not the only one whose heart is being pierced by this horrifying sight. Next to me is my Master's mother, Mary.
For a moment, I feel like I'm 16 again, holding my weak old son in my arms, listening to an old man's prophetic message. He spoke of an event in the future when a sword would pierce my own soul too. All I could do was hold my baby close to my heart and nod in partial understanding. But those words have echoed in my heart after all these years. That was 33 years ago, and now the words are coming to life before my tear-blurred eyes. Just above me, my son is hanging on a cross with spikes protruding from his wrists and feet, and yet it seems only yesterday that my husband Joseph and my son Jesus were handling nails like those in their carpenter shop. Except for a few incidents, much of his growing years had been, well, ordinary. I remember that time when he was 12. I thought we'd lost him on the way home from a trip to Jerusalem, and after days of frantic searching, we found him in the temple, matching wits and discussing mature theology with the professors there. I knew he hadn't meant to alarm us, but like a good mother, I scolded him and told him how worried he had made us. He simply looked up at me with his innocent eyes and stated that we should have known that he would be in his father's house going about his business. But like all boys, he grew up, and after Joseph died, he cared for me and the rest of the family. He ran the family business, mentored his brothers in carpentry skills, and was a blessing to the entire community. But I knew it was only temporary. One day, as the red glow on the horizon was marking the end of another day, he walked into the house, and he looked at me, not saying anything, but in his eyes I could see that his real purpose had begun. I didn't completely understand, but I gave him my blessing. For 3 years he traveled, taught, and transformed people all over the land. Stories about what he was doing would make their way back to me. Some were wonderful, some preposterous. From time to time, he'd stop by home to see me, always too short a visit. He'd pick me up in his strong arms and hug me to his heart, kissing my cheek softly. So many times I wanted to ask him to stay, but I knew he was a man on a mission, so I'd let him go, always promising him my love and my prayers. His grateful smile and the look in his eyes warmed my heart for many days after each visit. Normally, each year, our whole extended family would come to celebrate the Passover feast in Jerusalem. But this year, I knew that it was vital for me to be here. I needed to be near him because in my heart, I knew his mission was almost done. It has been an awful week. There were intense confrontations with the Pharisees in the temple, and then the illegal night trial that was more of a mockery before the Sanhedrin, the audience with Herod, the puzzling performance with Pilate, the shocking scourge of the soldiers, the blood-stained steps through the winding street out the city gate, and the final ascent to the skull-shaped hill known as Golgotha. All the while being pelted with the deafening shouts of the crowd. John pushed his way through the crowd so we could be near him and stand at the foot of the cross. And as I heard the sound of the hammer ring as it struck the nails being pounded through the flesh of my son, my heart felt a sharp stab of pain unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It was then that the words of the prophet came back to me. And a sword will pierce your own soul too. Oh, now I understand. It has all come to this. But then it has always been about this. Somewhere in my mother's heart, I've always known this was his mission.
It's hard to imagine what Mary must be feeling at this point. There are so few faces showing love for Jesus in this vast sea of people spread out around the cross. Jesus' face is barely recognizable. I have seen that face at all times of the day, in nearly every possible situation. I could never have imagined seeing it the way I'm seeing it today. That wonderful face. Just last night, I saw that face. So young in time, so old in wisdom, in such agony that he was literally sweating great drops of blood in the Garden of Gethsemane. And I saw his face overwhelmingly sad, as Judas betrayed him with a kiss on his cheek. I haven't seen Judas since last night. He wouldn't dare show his face around here after what he did.
As I stand here overlooking this potter's field, my soul is tormented and tortured. I've heard it said that before you die, your life flashes before your eyes. From the very beginning, I felt like an outsider because I was not from Galilee like the rest of his disciples. I tried to get into the inner circle of Peter, James, and John, but I couldn't crack it. Jesus appointed me as our group's financial manager. He never seemed to pay too much attention to the financial side of things, saying we should put God's kingdom first, and that his Father would make sure that all of our needs were met. Being with him was both exhilarating and troubling. He had that right blend of popularity, religious teaching, and extraordinary results. He could have been a great leader, easily united our kingdom, kicked out the Romans, brought God's kingdom to earth with just one word. But what troubled me with him was he seemed oblivious to the opportunities to advance my agenda. I mean, his agenda. I hinted at it numerous times, but there was no manipulating him or changing his mind. For 3 years, I followed this man, and during that time, dark whispers from the shadows became more insistent and easier to hear. When we arrived in Jerusalem on Sunday to vast cheering throngs of people, it was a welcome fit for a king. Things finally appeared to be going in the right direction. And then, things quickly went in the opposite direction. I heard that Caiaphas, the high priest, was holding a meeting to deal with this Jesus situation once and for all. I went, and I listened to him declare that it was better for one man to die than for our whole way of life to be lost. Something inside me trembled when I heard those words. Everything appeared to be coming to a head. My mind raced. There has to be a way to rescue this situation. Whispers from the darkness fed on my ambition and my greed, offering their own suggestions. Things finally reached a breaking point for me on Wednesday night. We were eating a meal at the home of Simon when a woman came in and broke a fine alabaster jar of very expensive perfume. She poured it first on Jesus' head and then anointed his feet. The While the beautiful fragrance of the perfume filled the room, all I could see was a year's worth of wages being wasted. And so I protested. The money used to purchase this expensive perfume could have been put to better use, like helping the poor. But instead of agreeing with me, Jesus rebukes me.
Oh, please. She's preparing my body in advance for my death and burial.
It was at that moment I realized I had no choice but to force his hand in my direction, the way that I thought it should go. He left me with no choice. I'd have to make it happen. So I excused myself from the meal, but I didn't tell them it was to gain an audience with Caiaphas and his inner circle of advisors. What will you give me if I hand over Jesus of Nazareth to you? The price? 30 pieces of silver, the price of a slave. They even hinted that this was just the first installment if I kept my promise. I remember thinking how I knew that I had gotten the better end of the deal, for you see, Caiaphas was now indebted to me. No matter how the situation turned out, he would take my side and protect me. I began to look for the right time and place, out of the way, easy to access under the cover of darkness, and one that offered escape routes if needed. The Garden of Gethsemane, yeah. Jesus often took us to pray there in the evenings. That would be just right. The shadows of darkness were growing stronger. Before, I had always been able to silence the whispers, but now they were crowding in on me, pressuring me, gaining more control. We all gathered at that upper room for the Passover meal, and Jesus quietly asked me to take the place to his left, the place that's normally reserved for an honored guest. I was both honored and confused. Did Jesus somehow know what I had done? We carried on with the meal, eating and talking, until Jesus looked up. Looking around the table at each one of us, he spoke.
One of you is going to betray me.
I was quivering inside. One word from Jesus, and I would be exposed, and the other 11 men, they'd make sure that I never left the room alive. One by one, the disciples asked Jesus if they were the betrayer. Suddenly, I realized that I hadn't said a word, and so in an unnatural-sounding voice, I said, "Surely, not I, Rabbi." Jesus took a piece of bread, dipped it into a bowl of sauce that was in front of him, and he handed it to me. Whenever a host would take food from his own plate and offer it to one of his guests, it was an incredible sign of friendship. Our eyes met in a wordless conversation. Jesus knew I would force his hand. I leaned forward, smiling, and ate the bread from Jesus. I had made my choice. He is going to do things according to my plan. And that's when Jesus said to me in a low voice that only I could hear,
"Do what you're going to do, and do it quickly."
From that moment on, I was controlled by something or someone. I made my way back to the temple. I smiled as they dropped the 30 silver coins into my money belt. I tied it around me, but somehow it seemed tighter than ever before, almost like it was squeezing and slowly suffocating me. I was surprised to see the size of the mob that had assembled to arrest one man, the most peaceful man I'd ever known. There were dozens of fully armed Roman soldiers, temple guards with weapons, and priests who wanted to get in on the action. As we walked to the garden, the shadows, they seemed like they were alive, reaching out to me and taunting me. I turned to the soldiers closest to me. Now remember, the one I greet with a kiss is the one. That is the signal. In the midst of the olive trees, one man stood alone. When I saw him, the dark one inside me seemed to rise up with an ugly, unearthly pleasure. Jesus looked at me and spoke softly.
"Friend, do what you have come to do."
I could feel my heart beating as I heard my voice, but it wasn't my voice exactly.
"Greetings, Rabbi."
Grabbing him by the shoulders, I kissed him once, twice, and then again as if emphasizing some point. Jesus looked right at me.
"Oh, Judas."
His voice overruled all of the other voices that were inside me as he touched my heart one last time.
"You betray the Son of Man with a kiss?"
I stepped aside. I had done my part. Now it was time for Jesus to do his. All he had to do was take control. Jesus stood tall and strong in the moonlight.
"Who is it you are looking
He spoke loud enough so that everyone in the crowd could hear him. Voice sounding fearful spoke up. Jesus the Nazarene? It was 100 against 1, but they had heard what he could do, and if he turned his power loose on them...
I am.
Jesus' ringing response echoed with divine power, and the force of his words pushed us all down to the ground. We all expected divine wrath to swallow us up right there and then. But nothing happened, so Jesus again asked the crowd,
Who are you looking for?
Another voice, a bit bolder this time, shouted, Jesus of Nazareth!
I told you, I am he. So if you are looking for me, then let the rest of these men go.
Peter jumped out of the shadows, swinging and slashing with his short sword. A man fell down to my right, crying out in pain. Then the sounds of dozens of swords sliding from their scabbards filled the air. The situation was rapidly heading into deadly chaos. Jesus took control, but not the way that I wanted him to. He knelt and he healed the soldier by reattaching his ear. That moment, all of his disciples ran away into the darkness, and I was left standing there, frozen in place, watching as the mob surrounded Jesus, as they grabbed him and tied his hands behind his back. And then the mob was gone. I was left standing alone, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Everything had gone according to plan, but yet nothing was going according to plan. And then it slowly hit me that I had been played in a much bigger game. I stumbled back the way I came back to Caiaphas' home. It was the middle of the night, but the place was alive with laughter and anticipation. People who recognized me congratulated me on my achievement. They even called me a hero. At that moment, a verse from the Psalm surfaced in my mind. Even my friend in whom I trusted, the one who ate my bread, has lifted his heel against me. It was the betrayer's verse, and it was about me. Suddenly, I was gripped with a deep sense of remorse. I have betrayed an innocent man. This isn't justice. It was murder. Wait a minute. The law says if a person gives back the money, any deal is made null and void. They have to let Jesus go. Surely they'd honor their own laws. So I staggered through the doorway. I have sinned. They smiled at me and said nothing. I have sinned. I have betrayed innocent blood. I want to call the whole thing off. They just laughed at me. What do we care? That's your problem. I was dumbfounded. These were the priests, the representatives of God. I had just confessed my sin to them, and they are supposed to find a way for me to be forgiven, to make things right. And instead, they slammed the door of restoration in my face. If there's no hope from them, then there's no hope at all. Reaching under my cloak, I tore off my money belt with trembling hands, counted out 30 pieces of silver. You have to take the money back. You have to take the money back! I threw the money at them. The ringing sound of silver on stone echoed throughout the room. I ran from there, not knowing where to go. No hope! The voices screamed in my head. I stumbled through the narrow streets, the voices pushing me outside the city, away from the crowds, to a place that leads to the edge of a sheer rock face. What am I doing here? Some call this the doorway to hell, because it was a place of human suffering and sacrifice to demonic forces for generations. There's no hope! The voices are so loud I can't hear anything else. They're snarling and taunting, jeering and accusing me. Money belt. Still in my hands. This belt was my identity, my security, my life! Now, it's going to be the cause of my death. There's no hope for me. It wasn't supposed to end like this!
I don't understand. How could someone be with Jesus all those years and just turn on him like that? But then, none of Jesus' brothers or sisters are here to comfort their mother Mary either. The other women with me continue to stand at the foot of the cross, crying tears of wrenching sorrow. Seems like he's coming out of the very depths of their being. I watched him last night, regal and calm as he faced his accusers, answering without reservation that he was indeed Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God, the great I Am. But now, between the physical torture he experienced and the spiritual suffering he was enduring from the crushing weight of humanity's sin laid on him, I can barely recognize him. The priests convicted him of blasphemy. They blindfolded him. They beat him over and over. They spit on him while they did it. One of his eyes swelled shut, and his cheeks are all puffed up from being beaten so much. His lips were broken and cracked and bleeding. And then they pulled out patches of his beard and threw it on the floor while they hurled their hatred in his face. But that punishment was only the beginning. The priests pushed and pulled and dragged Jesus on a journey that led them in the early morning hours to the home of Pilate.
For months, I've been getting reports back about the man I'm to judge today. From all the information I've gathered, this Jesus of Nazareth is not a political climber, a military leader, or even a publicity seeker. He's a carpenter, in his 30s, unmarried, and of a low economic class from a little town to the north called Nazareth. I've even heard reports of supernatural occurrences. Wherever this Jesus goes, miracles seem to follow. Blind people receive their sight, deaf people's ears open to sound, crippled people dance on restored limbs, wild-eyed people possessed by who knows what instantaneously return to sanity. I've even heard stories of dead people being resurrected to life. But his popularity is a paradox. His organization consists of only a dozen men and a few women. And to my knowledge, he never made an attempt to gain power of any kind. His teaching and actions resemble those of a servant more than a celebrity. Yet Jerusalem's leaders view him as a threat, a rival. Some call him a savior, others a king, and still others like myself don't know what to think. But now everyone has heard about this Jesus of Nazareth. Even my wife Claudia, who sometimes watches the crowds, has told me about him. She seems to be deeply moved by what he says and even thinks that he might be God in the form of a man. Well, whatever he claims to be, I find religion contemptible. I've seen religion in my military travels and the idols and careless prayers that lead to fear, suspicion, and frustration. Well, I'll have none of it.
Sir, the priests and prisoner have arrived. They're waiting outside so as not to defile themselves in your unclean home.
Such silly religious rules they follow. Very well, I shall be there presently. They look like they haven't had any sleep. And that one must be the prisoner. He's dressed plain enough in a seamless robe smeared in dirt and... oh, is that spit? Well, these leaders certainly have been busy. They look more like a pack of snarling animals awaiting a kill than religious leaders. And the prisoner's face. He's the only one calm in the group, though he's already showing evidence of being beaten. He's definitely not like the other wild-eyed revolutionaries who struggle and curse the Romans. There's something different about him. Look at how he holds his head high, almost as if he's the one in control of the situation. What charges are you bringing against this man?
If he were not a criminal, we would not have handed him over to you.
They dare to disrespect me in my own home. I think not. Fine. Take him yourselves and judge him by your own laws.
But, Pilate, we have no right to execute anyone. Only the Roman government can authorize a public execution.
So that's it. You want me to give my stamp of approval so you can kill Jesus. Very well, Centurion. Bring me the prisoner so that I may speak with him privately. Are you the king of the Jews?
Is it your idea, or did others talk to you about me?
That's a very clever response. Do you think I am a Jew? It was your people and your chief priests who handed you over to me. What have you done? Are you seeking to overthrow Rome with a kingdom of your own?
My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jews. My kingdom is from another place.
You are a king then.
You are right in saying I am a king. For this reason I was born, and for this cause I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me.
Truth? What is truth? Perhaps truth is standing before me at this very moment. Take him. Away with him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against this man.
But we have a law. and according to that law, he must die. He claimed to be the Son of God. He's been spreading his lies all over the nation, starting in Galilee.
Well then, this is a matter for Herod. Take him to Herod's palace and let him deal with this man. In the meantime, bring me the other prisoner. I know what you're trying to do. I know your methods of attempting to squeeze me into doing your bidding. But I have a solution to the problem, and his name is Barabbas.
Pilate has requested the other prisoner, Barabbas.
So you are the famous revolutionary. You are nothing like the other one. You have been sentenced to die, Barabbas, and it would give me no greater pleasure than to run you through with my own sword right now. But, according to your custom, I release a prisoner at the time of your people's great religious feast. This year, I'm going to let the people choose. Jesus the Nazarene, whom many are calling the Christ, the Son of your God, has been accused of treason by your priests. They want him crucified. The only thing he's guilty of is spreading a message of hope, forgiveness, and love. You, however, are here because I could think of no one who deserves death more than you do. You are flagrantly guilty of all you've been charged with, and much more.
Sir, Herod has returned the prisoner, the Nazarene called Jesus.
And?
At first he received the prisoner with amusement, but when he refused to validate his reputation by showing a miracle on demand, Herod grew tired of him. After ridiculing and mocking the prisoner, they wrapped him up in a special garment, just for you.
Very well. Take this one and the Nazarene to my seat of judgment on the porch overlooking the courtyard. If these people have any sense of decency at all, the choice of whom to free will be clear. So Herod passes the prisoner back to me and has wrapped him in an elegant robe. Well, it does give him a more kingly appearance. I'll give you that, Herod. But you have certainly made my job more difficult. And in the short hour he's been gone, a mob has gathered. Fine. Let's get this over with. I have found this man Christ innocent of all wrongdoing as Herod has done. He has sent him back to us. I will have him flogged and released. He has done nothing worthy of death.
Excuse me, sir. You have a message, a note from your wife.
Claudia? This is highly unusual. What does she want?
Have nothing to do with this just man. I've had a vivid dream about him. That troubles me greatly.
What does she expect me to do? I must find a way to wash my hands of the whole affair. You hear them, don't you? They want you dead. Tell me, where do you come from? Are you really from God? Do you refuse to speak to me? Don't you realize that I have the power to either free you or crucify you?
You have no power over me that was not given to you from above. The ones who handed me over to you are guilty of a greater sin.
Crucify! 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 Would you have me crucify your king?
We have no king, but Caesar.
I find no basis for a charge against him. But it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of Passover. Which one of these men do you want me to release to you? Barabbas, who has taken part in a rebellion? Or Jesus, the King of the Jews, who is called the Christ? I find nothing wrong in this man.
Crucify this one who pretends to be the king. Any man who sets himself up as a king is a rebel against Caesar.
Bring me a basin of water. I am now symbolically washing my hands, and all of you are bearing witness to it. I am innocent of the blood of this righteous man.
His blood be on us and on our children.
Take him and do with him as you wish. The responsibility is yours. Release the murderer Barabbas.
Pilate tried to just wash his hands, and he'll never be able to escape what he did in his heart. He handed him over to the Roman soldiers, and they went to work on Jesus with their own form of torture. They try and bleed every bit of life just short of death out of a person, so that when they do kill him by crucifixion, they die that much quicker. They led Jesus out of the courtyard, where they beat him on the head with a staff. Then they put that wooden staff in his hand as a mock scepter, and they cursed him and jeered at him. Then they went to work on his body. They stripped him naked. They bent him over and tied his hands to a pole. And one soldier began to hit him, and then the other, with what they call the cat of nine tails, literally tears the skin down to the bone from a person's body. They beat him from his ankles to his neck until blood splattered like rain. Oh, the soldiers gnawed the ground. And then they untied him. They put a royal robe around his shoulders. They took a branch from a thorn tree that has 1-inch thorns on it, and they made it into a crown and slammed it down on his head, opening even more wounds. And then they bowed to him and mocked him and called him king.
He's a king after all.
Between the beatings, the lashings, the puncturing thorns, the finishing blows of the soldiers, Jesus is barely recognizable. He barely looks like a man. How can God allow this to continue? It's been about 3 hours now since they threw Jesus down on his back on the splintered wood of a cross, and they nailed him to the cross with 6-inch rusty square spikes. I cringe at the sound of metal on wood. It brought the howling mob into shocked silence. Only scattered, muffled gasp and whimpering could be heard. It is a gruesome thing to hear nails driven through human flesh. And then they put his right foot over the top of his left foot, and they nailed his feet to the cross. As they lifted Jesus in the air and brought that cross down into the hole with a thud, the crowd suddenly opened up on him with blasphemy and mockery. The soldiers, they sat down and gambled for his robe. It's all he had left in this world. And so here we are, as close to the cross as we are allowed. All we can do is watch and wait for him to die.
Father, forgive them, for they know not what they are doing.
His words send a shockwave rippling through the mass of people. It's the last thing they expected to hear. Forgive? And then to look at my friend Mary Magdalene. She knows what it's like to be forgiven. Her life is an example of what it's like to know the power and love of divine forgiveness.
Forgive. Oh, that word triggers a flood of memories. I remember the first time I heard about Jesus. It was 2 years ago. I had heard about men with big reputations before, but the man in person rarely lived up to it. And the fact that he was religious didn't matter much either. Some of the so-called religious leaders were customers of mine. I had a lot of acquaintances, but no one that I would actually call a friend. No one I could trust, and no one who genuinely loved me. Whenever I went in public, the good people would scorn me, telling their children to stay away from people like me. Apparently, everyone thought I was beyond salvaging. Everyone except Jesus. I remember getting up one morning and looking at my reflection in the basin of water. Though I'm not very old, my sinful lifestyle had aged me beyond my years. My face has grown weathered and wrinkled by my hard life, which was mirrored by my heart. Even extra makeup won't be able to preserve my fading beauty for long. Then my customers would no longer desire me, and my life would be over. My soul was dark and empty. I turned to a spiritual medium who lived near me on the wrong side of town. The old woman greedily took my money and gave me some words to chant to a god that she promised would keep me young and bring me good fortune. I followed her instructions, and I felt a power that I had never sensed before. As the days went by, I opened myself up to the dark forces more and more, until one day I realized that I was not controlling them. They were controlling me. I was lost, disillusioned, degraded, and desperate. This was my daily reality. Then I heard about the carpenter turned preacher, how he treated everyone the same way, never condoning sin, but not being condescending either. Suddenly a spark of hope began to dawn deep in the recesses of my heart. Perhaps he is different from all the rest. Perhaps he could even set me free from my past and cleanse me from the deep, dark stains of sin. Perhaps there might even be a future for me, and God could salvage something from my life after all. If I could just talk to him, I would ask him. If I could have this freedom that he offered to those who would follow him. If I could just get close enough to see him when there wasn't a crowd of people, maybe then That was when I heard that Jesus was in my town and that he was dining at the home of Simon, a prominent local Pharisee. A plan began to form in my mind. I would see Jesus. It didn't matter what anyone else thought or said. I must see him. I must talk to him. I must ask him to please forgive me too. But what could I give him? I must have something to pay for his services. If there's one thing I understood, nothing comes free. Beside my bed, I saw a jar of fine alabaster with some expensive perfume. Perhaps that would do. Walking the street to Simon's home that night was a struggle. The dark forces tried to make me turn back, resisting my every step. But hope drew me on, and I felt another power help me against the tide of darkness. Finally, I reached the door of Simon's house. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside, uninvited. As my eyes adjusted to the lamplight, I saw a number of people reclining at a table, eating a meal. Upon seeing me, the looks on their faces registered everything from surprise to shock to disgust, all except for one face. When my eyes met his, I realized a man had never looked at me in that way before. He was looking right into my heart. It was like every part of my life was an open book before him. He knew me, and yet he didn't reject me. There was this unspoken openness, yes, even acceptance, in the eyes of Jesus. In spite of who I was, in spite of what I'd done, in spite of everything, I sensed that for the first time I was genuinely and unconditionally loved. The floodgates of my heart burst open as I ran to the table and fell at his feet weeping. Please forgive me, I begged through my tears. If you are all they say you are, please take this gift as my payment to you. My tears mixed with expensive perfume on the feet of Jesus, making small tracks through the dust. I wiped his feet clean with my hair. The room was silent. I heard faint whisperings, but no one dared to speak what they were all thinking about me. Then Jesus turned to his dinner host.
Simon, there's something I need to say to you. There were two men who owed money to a certain moneylender. One of them owed him 1.5 years' wages, and the other less than 2 months. Now, neither of them had the money to pay him back, and so he canceled the debts of both men. Which of them do you think will love him the more?
I heard Simon shift uncomfortably in his seat as he told Jesus that he believed it was the one who had the bigger debt canceled.
Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You did not give me any water for my feet, but she wet my feet with her tears, and she wiped them with her hair. You did not give me a kiss of greeting, but this woman, from the moment I entered, has not stopped kissing my feet. You did not put oil on my head, but she has poured perfume on my feet. And therefore I tell you that her many sins have been forgiven, for she loved much. For he who has been forgiven little loves little. Daughter,
yes,
your sins are forgiven. Your faith has saved you. Go in peace.
For a moment, I didn't understand. He didn't ask anything of me. He didn't give me a long list of things to do in order to earn forgiveness. He simply and freely forgave me completely. I didn't deserve it. I didn't earn it. And yet, in one powerful act of love, he wiped clean my past and gave me what I had never experienced before. A clean conscience, a sense of worth, a sense of being accepted by God and being really, truly loved. And now as I stand here at the foot of the cross, I realize something that I hadn't understood until this moment. I should have been on that cross. I deserve to die, not him. But he took my place, paying a penalty I owed for sin. That is how valuable I am to him. That is the price of forgiveness.
Even in the midst of the agony he's experiencing on the cross, he's showing love to those that love him most and least. Jesus hasn't spoken very much over the last few hours. The longer he hangs, the more difficult it is for him to breathe, and every word comes with physical exertion and great pain. I listened to him promise pardon and paradise to Decimus, the thief hanging on his right. When I look into his eyes, I see the immense suffering and yet also that familiar look of tender love I know so well. It was that kind of love that made me follow Jesus in the first place. It was that kind of love that transformed me from a quick-to-anger son of thunder into an apostle of love. Look at them. The soldiers seem oblivious to the eternal drama taking place right in front of them, except that one centurion. And from the look on his face, it seems like he's puzzled by what's happening here, as if there's something he's never experienced before.
I've heard other men call upon their gods in times of trouble. They bargain for mercy. This man sounds like he's crying out to a family member. Could this man be the Son of God? The more I've learned about this Jesus, the more concerned and confused I am. Typically, Jewish people have a fierce loyalty to their country and their religion. They hate Romans with a passion, mostly in the name of their religion. I've often wondered how a religion could produce so much hate. If I ever follow a religion, I can tell you that it'll be one that has love at its heart. I've had enough hate to last a lifetime. This man didn't preach revolution or hatred against the Romans. He spoke of transformation of the heart by love. As a Roman centurion, I often have to deal with insurrections in Palestine and gather information about potential threats to Roman rule. The first reports on Jesus were different than any other man I've ever investigated. He didn't try to drum up crowds. Rather, he seemed to shy away from publicity. He was gaining a great deal of popularity with all kinds of people. Even tax collectors and prostitutes were gladly following him. Wherever this Jesus went, people became different. Reports say that he was even heard to forgive people of their sins. Even I know that only a God can do that. I was there when he rode into Jerusalem. We were ready for an uprising, but it was nothing more than a peaceful demonstration of people waving palm branches like festival banners and laying their robes on the roadway. The city had never seen such a triumphal entry. It was a welcome celebration fit for a king. And how quickly things changed as their shouts of Hosanna to the Christ on Sunday became crucify the criminal on Friday. I was surprised when the Jewish religious leaders struck a deal with Pilate to do away with the man. Why would religious leaders want to orchestrate a murder? I was directed to arrest him in the garden just outside the city under the cover of darkness. I'd been with the prisoner every step of the way, from supervising his arrest to leading him from the Sanhedrin to Pilate and Herod, and then back to Pilate again. It was when he was standing before Pilate that things changed for me. When he said he was a king, well, I hadn't minded him being a teacher or even a miracle worker, but a king? No. Caesar is my king. He commands most of my time. But the rest of my life is my own. And this King Jesus is not going to be my king. At that point, I had no problem agreeing with the desire of the people to crucify him, because I knew that under the pressures of crucifixion, he would show his true colors. I oversaw his scourging and even rode behind him to Calvary to make sure the crucifixion took place as ordered. But the carpenter never once resisted. This Jesus maintained a grace, even a dignity throughout the painful process. I was sure he would break his calm and begin cursing and making threats, even bargaining with us when we nailed his hands and feet to the wood. I've seen a lot of men die. Death always reveals a man's true character. Jesus would have to crack sooner or later, right? But he didn't. In spite of the incredible pain, Jesus still had this unearthly dignity and strength about him. No hatred, no fear on his lips, no malice in his eyes. When he looked at the crowd and prayed for the forgiveness of the very ones who had mistreated him, including me, my heart began to shake as I realized I had just heard something that was not human, but divine. This man might actually be who he claims to be. Only a God in the form of a man could handle all of this. I felt a deep hunger growing inside my soul. I had to talk to this man, not to gather more information, but to talk to him about the needs of my own heart. If he can forgive one of the thieves on the cross, then surely he could forgive me too. But it's too late now. Jesus is dying before my very eyes, dying like a king, sacrificing himself for the freedom of his people.
It is finished.
I've never seen love like this before.
Father, into your hands I commit my spirit.
Surely this man was the Son of God.
With that final statement, Jesus lowered his head as if he was resting and willingly gave up his spirit. Suddenly, the ground began to shake as even the earth seemed to shudder at the death of its creator. They watched as the soldiers broke the legs of the two thieves on the crosses beside Jesus to speed up their deaths. But when the soldiers came to Jesus, they found that he was already dead. To be sure, one of the soldiers plunged a spear deep into Jesus' side, causing a mixture of blood and water to pour from his wound. There was no doubt. Jesus was dead.
His face seems different somehow now.
He looks as if he's sleeping. And at any moment he'll wake up and tell us this has all been a bad dream. He's not going to wake up, though, is he?
The look of agony is gone. He's at peace now.
But his final words didn't sound like someone who was dying. He didn't sound defeated. It sounded like a mighty warrior shouting victory.
Oh, John, what are we going to do with him?
I don't know, Mary.
Well, we can't just leave him here. He's our friend. He deserves a proper burial.
But we're too far away to carry him back to the family tomb in Nazareth, and the Sabbath is almost upon us. We're running out of time.
Mary, I'm so sorry for your tragic loss.
Nicodemus, Joseph, I didn't realize you were both here.
Don't worry about the funeral arrangements. I've already taken care of that. I asked Pilate for permission to take Jesus' body to a tomb I have near here. It's never been used, and with your blessing, I would be honored to lay him to rest there.
We also have a shroud, linen, and spices to prepare his body. Please allow us the privilege of showing our respect for him in this way.
Yes, of course. Thank you. I don't think I would have enough strength to prepare his body today.
John, why don't you take Mary and the other women to a safer place? Who knows what trouble might be brewing as we speak. I'll meet up with you later.
Okay, I'll do that. We'll go back to the place where we celebrated Passover with the Master. Thank you so much.
Goodbye, my son. I will see you again soon.
Nicodemus and Joseph of Arimathea carefully wrapped Jesus' body in a shroud and carried him to Joseph's tomb. The shroud covered the body, but a separate cloth was tied around the head to keep the jaw closed. Nicodemus and Joseph anointed the body by soaking the shroud in a thick liquid of spices, including myrrh and aloes. Then they used more than 75 pounds of spices and dozens of feet of cloth to lovingly wrap the body of Jesus, placing the spices between each layer of wrapped cloth. But they were unable to finish before sundown, the start of the Sabbath. Meanwhile, John, Mary, and many of the other followers of Jesus slowly made their way back to the upper room. They were all physically, emotionally, and spiritually exhausted. Although the door was barred, they jumped at every sound for fear that they might be taken away next.
Joseph, Nicodemus, come in. We've been worried about you. Thank you for taking care of Jesus' body. I realize now you took such a huge risk when you did that. You're now identified as one of us, one of his followers. You're targets just like we are.
How I wish we had been able to persuade the rest of the council to realize how wrong they were. I wish I had taken more of a stand and not been so quiet. But that is in the past. We must all move on forward together. I'm sorry to tell you that Joseph and I didn't finish the burial process. We ran out of time.
Tomorrow, some of the other women and I could go to the tomb and finish preparing the body. We can go as soon as the Sabbath ends.
I can provide you with more spices, but I'm afraid that none of us will be seeing his body anytime soon.
Why? What's happened, Nicodemus?
A large stone, shaped like a wheel, was rolled in front of the tomb, and it is far too heavy for one person to move. In addition, a Roman contingent is guarding the tomb.
But why go through so much trouble to guard his body?
Apparently, some of the Jewish leaders pressured Pilate into doing this. It seems they're afraid that his followers will try to steal the body.
Steal his body? We're sitting here paralyzed with fear, and they think we're going to be bold enough to go steal his body? Why? What purpose would that accomplish?
They hope this will stop anyone from saying he is risen from the dead. They remembered Jesus saying after 3 days he would rise again. So the soldiers have been ordered to remain for 3 days to guard his tomb.
Pilate even placed his own seal on the stone. Anyone who is found breaking it will be condemned to death.
So that's it. We can't even pay our respects to his body.
It doesn't matter. We'll leave while it's still dark. We'll figure out some way to move the stone so we can finish properly preparing his body.
I guess I'll go back to fishing again. I don't know what else to do. I've got to make a living somehow.
Peter, it's been 3 years since we left our fishing occupation to follow the Master. We simply go back to work as if the last 3 years never happened?
I'm afraid I don't have any answers, my brother, but give it some time.
I just need some time to think. No one seems to say it out loud, but I'm sure we're all thinking the same thing. If Jesus is dead, then our faith, which was wrapped up in him, it's dead too, wrapped up and buried in a tomb, and the truth of his teachings and the power of his miracles are just as dead. And forgiveness? It's impossible. No matter how good I try to be, I'll never be good enough to overcome my sins. What I needed was a Savior, and the one I was counting on to save me is dead. I have no tomorrow to look forward to, no today worth living for. My own future is going to end at my grave, and until then, I'll be mocked by people saying how foolish I was to follow a carpenter. I've nothing left to believe in. But I can't. I refuse to go back to the deadness of religious rituals and rules. After following Jesus, nothing else will satisfy my soul.
The rest of the Sabbath passed slowly for all of Jesus' followers as their thoughts of despair and hopelessness filled the room. But early on the first day of the week...
Let me in! Let me in!
Mary Magdalene! Shh! Are you trying to wake up the neighborhood?
Oh, Joseph, Peter, everyone, you won't believe what I have to tell you.
What has you so worked up? You look like you've seen a ghost.
No, not ghosts. Angels. I've seen angels.
What? When?
Before first light, Jesus' mother Mary, Salome, and I gathered the spices from Nicodemus and headed to the tomb as we talked about yesterday. We planned to ask the soldiers to move the stone for us, but suddenly the ground shook and the soldier was knocked to the ground, unconscious. Then 2 men in dazzling white robes descended and easily moved the stone away. They were angels. One of them sat on top of the tombstone, smiled at us and said,
"Why are you looking for the living among the dead? Jesus is not here. He is risen. Go and tell his disciples."
So I left the others and ran all the way back here to tell you. I don't know what to think. I'm afraid they've taken the Lord away. I don't know where they laid him, but the angels say he's alive.
Peter, we have got to go see this for ourselves. Come on! I didn't think you were going to make it.
Well, you do have youth and speed on me, John. I don't see the guards or anyone else for that matter. And I don't see any angels, do you?
No, but look, the stone is rolled away just as the women told us. Could it be?
There's only one way to find out. I'm going inside. John, get in here.
What are you seeing, Peter?
This is amazing. I can't describe it. You have to see it for yourself.
I don't understand.
Look at his grave clothes.
They're still wrapped in the form of a body. It's like someone took their hand out of a glove. But there's no body. It's almost as if his body vanished right through the grave cloth.
Even a butterfly leaves an opening when it emerges from her chrysalis. You know this is impossible. It must be a trick.
Hey, look over there. The cloth that was tied around his head is neatly folded by itself.
Who could have done this?
Peter, don't you see? He's not here.
I can see that, John.
No, you don't understand. He's not here. He's risen. We've got to go back and tell the others.
It was true. Jesus had risen from the grave. Short time later, Mary Magdalene returned to the tomb to search for the body, but instead found the risen Lord. He even called her by name. Jesus was seen again and again. In fact, they came to expect they would see Jesus at any moment. Their doubt was now conquered by the reality of the resurrection, and their faith was strengthened as they understood that death, sin, hell, and even Satan were forever defeated because Jesus rose from the dead. His new life makes forgiveness available to anyone who will come to him in simple faith. life can now be viewed through the eyes of Easter, as we can clearly see everything through the reality and victory of Christ's glorious resurrection.
You've been listening to a special One Mission Stories Easter presentation of The Day That Changed Forever, featuring the voices of the OMS missionary family, including Jason Campbell, Tim Rail, Carl Walton, Carolyn Knight, Bob Featherland, Rich Dan Zeisen, Bill Evans, Sam Downey, Jessica Hollopeter, Roger Skinner, Tom Overton, Paul Cox, and me, Randy Spade. You can enjoy our special presentation again when you visit our OMS media site, www.oms.media. One Mission Stories is produced in cooperation with Freedom 95 and is recorded in the studios of One Mission Society's world headquarters, located in Greenwood, Indiana. The Day That Changed Forever is based on the book of the same name by Tim Rail and is available for purchase on Amazon.com. Our radio adaptation was created by Jason Campbell and was co-directed by Jason Campbell and Jessica Hollopeter. And I'm your announcer, Randy Spate, inviting you to join us next time for more One Mission Stories.